Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing the brand new Lorraine AMX M4, which some of you might know as the Lorraine 50T, which is the name of it on the PC version of World of Tanks. This is a French Tier 9 premium heavy tank. It's a very fast heavy tank, can go up to 60 kilometers an hour forwards. It's got a 120mm gun, and here on console it also has a second gun option in the form of a 130mm gun, and there are some stats differences compared to this and the PC's Lorraine 50T, so I'm going to run down all of the information on this tank in today's video. We'll go over here to tanks.gg, have a look at the armor profile of the Lorraine 50T or the Lorraine AMX M4, as they are the same armor profile. I'll show you my commander and equipment setup, and then I've got gameplay using both of the gun options to show you how this tank performs and how each gun differs. So to start off with, we are going to scroll on down here and have a look at the price of the Lorraine AMX M4, and as usual you can get it in a variety of bundles. You can get it from today, as I'm recording this video, on the 31st of January, and you can get it all the way up to 28th of February, so bear that in mind. The primed bundle, which comes with equipment, premium time and boosters, is 17,500 gold, so that's a lot of money out of your pocket. And the fully loaded bundle isn't much cheaper at 16,250 gold, and that comes with premium time and boosters. And if you just want the tank on its own, it's 12,500 gold, which is around a normal price for a recently released premium tank, especially a tier 9 premium tank. Of course, it will most likely be available either as an earn-up or in a sale event down the line, but it could be a month or it could be a year, who knows. So if you want this tank now, that's the price you're going to have to pay. And as you can see here, this is the artwork of the tank, very similar to the French Tech Tree Tier 9 heavy tank, the AMX M451. Large profile, looks like it's got some solid armor on the front. But yeah, this one is a very quick heavy tank indeed, and hopefully it will be good for ramming, and we'll have to see about that in the gameplay. But we're going to hop over here to Excel, where I've got the stats of the Lorraine AMX M4 here on the left in the first two columns. The first one on the left is the 120mm gun, and the column here on the right is with the 130mm caliber gun. So as a tier 9 premium heavy tank, two options that we can compare this tank to are the Concept 1B and AE Phase 1. They are both tier 9 premium heavy tanks, and both in the United States tech tree, or the premium tech tree I should say, and it's a good comparison to see how the stats of the Lorraine AMX M4 hold up. If you haven't seen any of my reviews before, red is the worst in the color coding, green is the best, and yellow is highlighted with my updated stats, and orange is somewhere in between. And here on Excel, we're also going to have a look at the differences between the Tech Tree AMX M451 and the Lorraine AMX M4. And that's going to be a comparison between the 120mm caliber gun on both of the tanks, as well as the larger caliber guns on both of the tanks. And I'm also going to show you the differences between the PC version of this tank, the Lorraine 50T, to the Lorraine AMX M4. A lot of stats there. If you want to skip forward to the sections which apply to you, of course they are time stamped, and you can skip forward to whichever section will help you the most. But now we're going to get stuck into the stats of the Lorraine AMX M4, starting with the XP bonus. All tanks in this comparison earn a 5% XP bonus. They don't earn a commander XP bonus, and they don't earn extra silver, so you are paying for the privilege of having a tier 9 tank with a little bit of an extra XP bonus. And now we're going to get on into the raw stats of this vehicle and the other two in this comparison. You'll notice that there isn't any color coding in this section here with the 130mm caliber gun on the Lorraine. We're just going to be comparing the base 120mm gun for this first section to the Concept 1B and AE Phase 1, as they only have one gun option each, unlike the Lorraine AMX M4. So this brand new French premium tier 9 heavy tank has 1750 hit points, and it has 380 meters view range. So hit points wise, a little bit less than the Concept 1B and AE Phase 1, but only by 50 hit points. You do have a nice slug of hit points to take a few rounds, be a bit of a bruiser on the front lines, and take a shot if necessary. And it does have some armor, mainly over the turret, which you might be able to ricochet, and we'll have a look at that in just a little bit. In terms of the view range, again, this is the worst in this comparison at 380 meters. It's not the worst it could be. 380 meters, you do need to give it a little bit of love and boost it up. And of course, it does depend on the playstyle and whether you want the ability to spot for yourself. And it's always advisable to do so, but you might want to improve the DPM and gun handling a little bit more in this tank. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the commander and equipment setup. But yeah, in terms of this comparison, you're 10 meters off of the AE Phase 1 and 20 meters view range off of the Concept 1B. So a lot of players will be using the advanced optics and situational awareness as a commander skill to boost that up. So not fantastic news, but it's definitely not the worst news for the Lorraine AMX M4. And now we're going to get into the mobility, and this is one of the telling points of this tank. It is a very quick tank indeed. It doesn't have the best in every area, as we'll have a look here with the color coding, but it does have the best top forward speed, turret traverse, and engine power. So the Lorraine AMX M4, 980 horsepower engine and a power to weight ratio of 17.82. You have that lovely best in class top forward speed of 60 kilometers an hour, and you have a reverse speed of 15 kilometers an hour, which isn't brilliant, but it's by no means as bad as the AE Phase 1, which has 12 kilometers an hour. In terms of your traverse speed for such a large heavy tank, 34 degrees a second on the hull isn't the worst it could be, and on the turret 30 degrees a second isn't brilliant, but you can boost that up with gun handling skills, and you'll see here the updated stats to the right with my commander and equipment setup, and yeah, I'll explain how I got to those figures a little bit later on. But what does it mean in terms of this comparison? Well, as you can see, it has the best engine power, but it doesn't have the best power to weight. It is a heavier tank than the Concept 1B, and the best power to weight goes to the Concept 1B. However, that tank is only limited to 45 kilometers an hour forwards, and the AE Phase 1 is only limited to 35 kilometers an hour forwards, so you definitely have to bear that in mind. Middle of the road power to weight, but you can get up to that 60 kilometers an hour, especially down slope. And then of course you come to the reverse speed, which isn't quite as good as the 18 kilometers an hour on the Concept 1B, but it does beat the AE Phase 1. And in terms of the traverse speeds, the best traverse speeds go to the Concept 1B on the hull and the turret. In terms of the hull traverse on the Lorraine AMX M4, it's better than the AE Phase 1, but it is 2 degrees a second less than the Concept 1B. But for such a big heavy tank, it isn't too bad at all, and you can boost that up with commander skills. And in terms of the turret traverse, 30 degrees a second is the same on all of these vehicles, and you do get to a very reasonable level when you apply your commander and equipment setup. So pretty damn good mobility for such a large heavy tank, and you can imagine it's going to deal some nice ramming damage. It does lack a little bit of hull armor, as we'll have a look in just a little bit, but you are a hefty boy indeed with a pretty large engine, nice power to weight, and best in class top forward speed and turret traverse. So now we're going to get on to the two gun options of the Lorraine AMX M4, and we're also going to have a look at the gun options on the Concept 1B and the AE Phase 1 to compare to this tank. So on the 120mm gun, that is the gun that the PC version has, you fire AP, APCR and HE as standard. Your shell velocity is 1067 meters a second on your standard AP and on your HE rounds, and it goes up to a very nice 1334 meters a second if you choose to fire the premium APCR rounds. You have 264 millimeters of standard penetration, which is very nice, and you have 308 millimeters if you want to use those premium APCR rounds, and 65 millimeters of penetration on your HE rounds. And the damage Very normal for a 120mm caliber gun, 400 on your standard AP and premium APCR, and it goes up to 515 if you choose to load those HE rounds. So here on the right we've got the stats of the 130mm gun on the Lorraine AMX M4. That fires AP, APCR and HE, the same as the 120mm caliber gun, but you do lose a lot of shell velocity. As you can see, it's 840 meters a second on each of the rounds, so you're going to have to give a little bit of extra lead than you would with the 120mm caliber gun. You also lose penetration, as you can see, 257mm on the standard rounds and 300mm of penetration on the premium APCR, but you do have the same 65mm of HE penetration. However, you do have that lovely jump in alpha damage to 560 on the standard AP and premium APCR, and if you penetrate your HE rounds with this 130mm caliber gun, you'll be dealing a whopping 640 alpha damage, and that really does chunk your opponents down. So how about the comparison then between the 120mm caliber guns on the Lorraine AMX M4 and the Concept 1B and AE Phase 1? Well, as you can see, in terms of the shell velocity, the best in the standard rounds, I should say, goes to the Concept 1B at 1478 meters a second, whereas the AMX M4 here on the left and the AE Phase 1 have 1067 meters a second. In terms of the premium shell velocity, then the best goes to the Lorraine AMX M4 at 1334 meters a second. Much better than the AE Phase 1 and even better than the Concept 1B, which has heat as its secondary ammunition choice. And lastly, the shell velocity on the HE rounds. The AE Phase 1 has the same as the Lorraine AMX M4 at 1067 meters a second, and the Concept 1B has 1173 meters a second, so you can see that's best in class there. How about the alpha damages then? It's all the same on all of these tanks at 400, 400 and 515 respectively with the ammunition. In terms of standard penetration, as you can see, the best in this comparison goes to the Lorraine AMX M4 at 264mm of penetration. That's very nice for standard rounds. At tier 9, it beats the 258mm on the Concept 1B and on the AE Phase 1. However, in terms of the premium rounds, unfortunately it is the worst in this comparison at 308mm. The heat rounds on the Concept 1B and AE Phase 1 are far superior. The Concept 1B has 310mm and the AE Phase 1 has full-blooded 340mm of penetration, so you're going to have to aim for weak spots better or more with the Lorraine AMX M4, but 308mm of penetration you definitely can make work. You just can't shoot and butter through the front of like an E100 or a mouse like you can with the AE Phase 1, and the 310mm of penetration on the Concept 1B does struggle in comparison to the AE Phase 1, but it is better than the brand new premium Lorraine AMX M4. One thing to note with the premium APCR rounds on the Lorraine AMX M4 is they will lose penetration over distance, whereas the heat rounds on the Concept 1B and on the AE Phase 1 will not lose penetration over distance, so those rounds will be better at firing at mid to long ranges. But of course, you're going to be playing a kind of brawling, bruising, frontline kind of heavy tank gameplay, and you can also play a kind of supporting heavy tank gameplay due to the lack of hull armor on this tank, as we'll get around to in just a little bit. But all in all, it's not too bad for this gun. You can see that it does have the same alpha damage as the other tanks in this comparison. Best in class standard penetration, best in class premium shell velocity due to the fact that APCR rounds, and in terms of the HE rounds, it does have the best penetration at 65mm for that 515 alpha damage. In terms of the gun handling then, let's have a look at the information here on the Lorraine AMX M4 and its 120mm caliber gun. Well, it's got an aim time of 2.5 seconds and an accuracy of 0.33, 5 rounds a minute, 12-second reload for that 400 alpha damage, which means you have a DPM of 2000, which has been bumped up from the PC version of this tank, which is the Lorraine 50T. You have 55 rounds, 10 degrees of gun depression, and 15 degrees of elevation. And before I compare this 120mm caliber gun to the Concept 1B in AE Phase 1, we'll run down the stats of the gun handling on the 130mm caliber gun on the Lorraine AMX M4. So for some reason you have better aim time with a higher caliber gun here on this 130mm caliber gun at 2.3 seconds, but you do have much worse accuracy at 0.37. It does stand to reason that you would have worse DPM. You have a rate of fire at 3.43. You reload in 17.5 seconds for that 560 alpha damage, or 640 if you penetrate the HE rounds, which means you do have a slightly reduced DPM at 1921, but it's not by too much, so that might put people off the 120mm caliber gun, and they're going to go for that higher alpha and make use of that to chunk your opponents down, because DPM sometimes isn't everything. It's just going to be whatever preference you have to which gun you choose. In terms of the 130mm caliber gun, you do have less ammunition. You have 20 less rounds at 35. You have less gun depression by 2 degrees at 8 degrees of gun depression, and the same gun elevation at 15 degrees. It's just going to be up to you whether you decide to lose that accuracy, lose a little bit of DPM for that higher alpha damage, or whether you want that better aim time, more alpha damage on the 130mm caliber gun, or you want that better DPM on the 120mm caliber gun. So now we're going to compare the gun handling and DPM on the Lorraine AMX M4 to the Concept 1B and the AE Phase 1. Well, as you can see here, it's got the joint worst in class aim time at 2.5 seconds, not quite as good as the 2.3 seconds on the Concept 1B, but you can get that down to a reasonable level. It does, however, have the best accuracy by some way at 0.33. The Concept 1B and AE Phase 1 have 0.38. And in terms of your reload then, you can see here 12 seconds, not quite as good as the 11 seconds on the AE Phase 1, but it does beat the Concept 1B by some way. And in terms of DPM, that of course will be the same as the reload. 2000 on the Lorraine AMX M4, not quite as good as the 2180 on the AE Phase 1, but it does beat the Concept 1B, which is a very popular tank, by quite a bit in terms of DPM on the 120mm caliber gun. You also have the most ammunition at 55 rounds, the joint best gun depression at 10 degrees, and 15 degrees of gun elevation, the joint worst with the AE Phase 1, whereas the Concept 1B has 5 degrees more at 20 degrees of gun elevation. But it's not bad news for this 120mm caliber gun and this 130mm caliber gun. It kind of ties in with its opponents very nicely, and if you're just comparing the 120mm caliber gun, of course you do have that best in class accuracy, which means you can invest your commander and equipment setup into other areas of this tank, improving the DPM, etc, etc. So the general take home, as you can see here, that you have this fantastic mobility, which you can boost up with mobility equipment if you so wish. You can also boost that up with gun handling skills in terms of your turret traverse, but that best in class top forward speed, you have slightly reduced view range and hit points, but you do have 2 nice gun options with best in class accuracy and nice gun depression you can use. So it's looking like a very versatile, flexible tank, playing that heavium kind of role where you can play a little bit like a medium tank and get across the battlefield. Before we get into my commander and equipment setup, I'm just going to show you the differences between the Lorraine AMX M4 and the Tech Tree AMX M451, which is the French Tier 9 Tech Tree heavy tank. That fires a 120mm caliber gun and a 127mm caliber gun, and I'm going to be comparing both guns to the Lorraine AMX M4 for you, so you can see the difference between this premium tank and the Tech Tree version. So in terms of the 120mm caliber gun on the Lorraine AMX M4 and on the AMX M451, you can see here that the Tech Tree tank has far superior hit points at 1900, and it has the same view range at 380 meters. In terms of engine power, the Tech Tree AMX M451 has a far greater engine power, but it has lots more armour than the Lorraine AMX M4 on the whole, which means that the rest of the stats are best in this comparison going to this brand new French premium tier 9 heavy tank. You have the best power to weight, forward speed, reverse speed, best hull traverse, and best turret traverse. In terms of the actual 120mm caliber gun itself, you can see here that the shell velocity, the ammunition that you fire, and the alpha damages are the same on both of these guns. However, it does differ slightly in terms of the penetration. The brand new French premium tier 9 heavy tank has the best penetration at 264mm of penetration, beating the Tech Tree AMX M451 by just a little bit, 7mm of penetration. However, you do lack premium penetration. You have 7mm less on your premium APCR rounds than the Tech Tree version, and you have the same 65mm of penetration on the Lorraine AMX M4 and the AMX M451. So a little bit of a difference, but not a massive difference. In terms of the gun handling, you do have worse aim time than the Tech Tree AMX M451, which has 2 seconds, but you do have the better accuracy. In terms of the rate of fire, you have a slightly better rate of fire, and you have a slightly better reload as a result at 12 seconds compared to the AMX M451's 12.5 seconds. You also have 80 more DPM, and you have more ammunition by 15 at 55 rounds. You also have 2 degrees more gun depression and the same gun elevation, so looks like a tick in my book to the premium tank. That's bearing in mind you don't mind losing a bit of hit points by 150 hit points. So yeah, not a massive difference between the Tech Tree version and the premium tank in that regard, but a massive difference in terms of the mobility and in terms of the DPM that can help you out. So next we're going to have a look just at the 2 guns on the Lorraine AMX M451 and the AMX M451. They both have 2 different gun options, and this is their second gun option, the higher caliber gun. On this brand new premium tank, you have a 130mm caliber gun, like I've alluded to, and on the Tech Tree AMX M451, you have a 127mm caliber gun, so 3mm less in caliber. In terms of the ammunition that you fire, it's the same on both of these tanks, but as you can see, the higher caliber gun on the brand new premium tier 9 tank is far superior in terms of all of the stats on this gun. You have a better shell velocity on all of your rounds, as you can see. You also have better standard penetration, better premium penetration, and slightly better penetration on the HE rounds, and you do have that much higher alpha damage by 90 alpha damage compared to the 470 alpha damage on the AMX M451. And in terms of the HE rounds, you have 30 more alpha damage at 640 compared to the AMX M451 610 alpha damage. And lastly, we're going to get onto the gun handling and the DPM of these 2 guns. Aim time is the same at 2.3 seconds, as is the accuracy at 0.37. However, the rate of fire is slightly better on the Tech Tree tank at 4 compared to 3.43 on the premium tank, which means that you have a 15-second reload compared to a 17.5-second reload on the Lorraine AMX M4, but bear in mind you do have that higher alpha damage, which means that you do actually have a better DPM than the AMX M451, and you have 5 more rounds of ammunition. So a premium tank with a better DPM and better stats, who would have thought it? You have the same gun depression and gun elevation. So again, in terms of the high caliber gun, like with the 120mm caliber gun, it looks like a tick in my book for the premium tank. A high caliber gun also means you're going to overmatch thicker plates of armor than you would with the AMX M451. And lastly, for those of you that have stuck around for all of the stats of this tank, I'm going to be comparing the Lorraine AMX M4 to the PC's version, which is the Lorraine 50T, just for those of you that want to know what has changed when this tank has come over from the PC version. Well, you have the same hit points and view range. However, you do have the better mobility in all areas. You have a better engine power. You have a better power to weight by quite some way, the same top forward and reverse speed, and you have better hull and turret traverse, so a massive tick for the console version. In terms of the ammunition that you fire, the shell velocity, the penetration and the alpha damage, that's the same as the PC version. And lastly, in terms of the aim time, you have a better aim time than the PC version, but a slightly worse accuracy. However, that's made up for by a better rate of fire, better reload, better DPM. As a result, you have the same ammunition as the PC version, which is the Lorraine 50T at 55 rounds, and the same gun depression and gun elevation at 10 degrees and 15 degrees of gun elevation respectively. So that's a massive stats comparison for this tank compared to the Concept 1B, the AE Phase 1. We've had a look at the differences between the Tech Tree French Tier 9 tank, the AMX M4 51, and we've also compared it to the PC's version of the Lorraine AMX M4. We're now going to have a look at my commander and equipment setup, and then we're going to go over and have a look at the armor layout of this tank. So in terms of equipment, I've chosen to run improved ventilation, advanced loader and gun stabilizer. And in terms of the commander skills, I run 6th Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Steady Aim, Rapid Aim, Snapshot, Clutch Break-In, Track Mechanic, and Situational Awareness. Bear in mind, I have tweaked this slightly occasionally. In terms of the equipment, I sometimes take out the vents and I put in the advanced optics if I feel like I just want view range for that session in terms of a little bit less gun handling and DPM. But of course, you can tweak that how you wish. But if you choose to run the same setup as me, you can see that your view range will be boosted to 452 meters, which isn't brilliant, which is why sometimes I do add that advanced optics in, but that's as good as I can get it with adding the vents in and using the commander skills, which is the situational awareness. That has improved my hull traverse to 37.19 degrees a second, and it's dramatically improved the turret traverse to 37.38 degrees a second, so my hull and turret now move pretty quickly for a fairly large, heavy tank. In terms of the aim time, that has improved to 2.26 seconds. My accuracy has improved to 0.26. My rate of fire has gone up to 7.03, which means I now reload on the 120mm gun for 8.53 seconds, and that gives me a DPM of 2,812. And in terms of the 130mm gun, my aim time is now 2.08 seconds, my accuracy is 0.29, my rate of fire is 4.82, which gives me a 12.44 second reload for that 560 alpha damage, and my DPM's gone up to 2,699, so a massive jump there, like on the 120mm caliber gun. And both of these gun options are very valid in my opinion. It just depends what you prefer. I'm kind of an alpha damage or someone that prefers the alpha damage, I should say, so I've gone for the 130mm caliber gun more often in my play session. However, you might choose to go for the 120mm caliber gun and have a slightly higher DPM. Of course, that is up to you, and if you do that, you do have the better penetration and the better shell velocity overall. So that's it for the stats there of the Lorraine AMX M4. We're going to head over now to tanks.gg and have a look at the armor profile of the Lorraine 50T, or what we're calling it on console, the Lorraine AMX M4. And as you can see right from the get-go, there's a lot of green all over the lower plate and the upper plate, meaning it's going to be very, very thin and easy to penetrate for a lot of tanks that you're going to be facing. So if this tank is looking at you without any of its gun depression, you can see that the upper plate, you only need 145mm or more to go through. So yeah, very weak indeed. And the lower plate, you only need around 210mm of penetration to go through the lower plate if you are staring directly at its gun. Of course, if you are slightly above it, that will become stronger and become an auto ricochet angle, but the upper plate will become weaker. So yeah, not great for a heavy tank or a super heavy tank, depending on what you want to call it. You have this weak point here on top in the form of the cupola. It's 100mm of base armor, but you need around 175mm due to the angling to go through it, so that's a very big weak spot as well. And if you're looking at this thing directly in the gun, you can see here that the turret on the outer edges is very strong due to the slope back nature, as you can see, of the turret, and there'll be some auto ricochet angles towards the outer edges. Towards the sort of mantlet here on the side, it's still pretty strong, and you're going to need around 350-360mm to go through. But there are two massive glaring weak spots to this turret, and if I scroll in here, underneath the gun and the lower portion of the mantlet, you only need around 250mm of penetration to go through it, and slightly above the gun and slightly above the mantlet, you need around 260mm to go through this portion of the tank. So if you shoot directly at the gun, up or below, there's a good chance you're going to go through, especially if you have around 260 to 280mm of penetration. That can be a bit of an issue. The actual turret itself, or the mantlet itself I should say, is pretty damn strong, and of course if you hit the gun, that'll be absorbed and you'll just break the gun and you won't do any damage. You want to avoid firing to the far outer edges of this turret and the roof, which will be an auto ricochet angle. One thing to note about the AMX M4, Lorraine AMX M4, is that the side armor is trash. So from the top of the tracks downwards, the side armor is only 30mm thick, which means that when this thing is side scraping against you, if you're going to be firing at this tank and you have a gun caliber of 91mm or more, you can overmatch the whole lower portion of this tank, including going through this drive wheel there, which means that it's a terrible side scraper, which is bad news for a heavy tank. And if you are firing at this ridge here, which I highly recommend you don't, to go through this portion of the tank when it's side scraping, you are going to need a 121mm caliber gun or more to go through, which there are quite a few at tiers sort of 9 and 10. So yeah, a pretty bad side scraper indeed. If you're firing or you're side scraping against someone that has a 90mm caliber gun, then of course you can do pretty well. But if you expose this portion too much, or you side scrape out too far, you'll expose this part and they can go through with around 148 to 150mm of penetration. If you are using the full extent of your gun depression at 10 degrees there with the 120mm caliber gun, if you do expose your lower plate or upper plate, you can still see is extremely poor still. Towards the upper part, you still only need around 200mm of penetration to go through reliably. The turret itself does become quite strong when you are using this 10 degrees of gun depression, and I'll just try and get it facing a little bit better there. You can't see the cupola when it's using the full extent of 10 degrees of gun depression. 8 degrees with the 130mm caliber gun, you have a slight chance of seeing, depending on how high you are. But when it's using its gun depression, shoot underneath the gun, you only need around 250 to 260mm to go through there, right at the lower portion of the mantlet. But it does mean that the rest of the turret is very strong indeed, and yeah, you can ricochet quite a few rounds if you are only exposing the top part of your turret and you're not exposing any of your hull. One other thing to know about this tank is that over the back you only have 3 degrees of gun depression, so if you're a small tank, get up behind it and you can go through 30mm of armor with 30mm of penetration and go through very easily. And yeah, apart from that, all you need to know is that you are a very large profile target from the side. Your turret from the side is 74mm of penetration needed to go through. That does go up to the part where you get to the part where your gun joins your tank at the sort of mantlet there, 230mm of penetration needed to go through there. To go through the side, it's going to be very easy indeed, and the rear of the tank and the rear of your turret is 30mm, so very poor indeed. So what's the take home? Get hull down where you can. Do not expose your upper and lower plate, as they're going to be butchered by all tanks you are going to come across. Some tier 7s may struggle, especially if you're angling slightly against them and you're sort of wiggling. They might hit the portions which are auto ricochet angles, but even sort of tier 7s with poor penetration, you're going to be able to go through your lower plate and upper plate quite reliably. You're going to want to get hull down, only expose your turret. If you're firing at it and it's hull down, shoot underneath the gun. You can go through with 250 to 260mm of penetration. If it's not using its gun depression, shoot at the cupola. That is a weak spot. If this thing is side scraping, have you got a 90mm caliber gun? Well, if so, you're not going to be able to overmatch. You've got to shoot for this part here if it gives it to you, or if it turns its turret, you can shoot the side of its turret. If you have a 120mm caliber gun, you can overmatch the part which is below the top of the tracks. However, you're going to want to need a 121mm caliber gun or higher to overmatch the top portion here, which is 40mm of armor. But having said that, like I've just said, actually, if this thing turns its turret even just the slightest bit, you can see here that it does expose flat portions, and they're easy to go through with around 200 to sort of 220, 240mm of penetration. So definitely take advantage of that when this thing's on a ridgeline. Wait for it to turn and you've got a nice juicy target there with a massive turret. So that's it for the armor viewer of the Lorraine 50T. We're now going to get stuck into the first gameplay. So we're now into the first gameplay of today's video. There will be 6 gameplays in today's video. There's 3 with the 120mm caliber gun and 3 with the 130mm caliber gun, so you can have a nice indication of how both guns perform on the battlefield in different matchmaking. And I have a nice little clip of some ramming speed at the end where we take out a T100 LT just before the outro of today's video, so definitely stick around for that if you like your rams. But first off, here we are on Hidden Village and we are making use of the fantastic top speed and pretty nice engine power to get into position in this sort of mid-ridge around E6, and we're going to try and get shots off towards the 9-0 line at people that might be crossing into the little village area, trying to go hold down and avoid taking fire where possible. But artillery will definitely have something to say about that in today's video, especially in this gameplay. And this tank does not take artillery rounds very well. Apart from the nice turret armor, you have that squishy side and rear armor, and when artillery hits you in the side, you lose a lot of damage like we just did. But we're just going to try and play this supporting role, playing a little bit like a heavy / medium tank. You definitely can play like a frontline brawler if you're on a ridge line. However, if you are having to support tanks on flat ground, say we were up higher than we are now, just to the right where our other heavy tanks are, we'd have to be more careful, try and side scrape out, not because we're trying to bounce shots, but because we're trying to give the enemies as little as possible to shoot at. Sometimes it's advisable when you're going around a corner to poke around at 45 degrees and just hope they ricochet off the outer side of your hull. Apart from that, you just have to be willing to take a shot sometimes to be able to get your shots in if you cannot go hold down. But we found a nice little hold down position here and we're getting some nice shots off. Just got to be a bit wary of the artillery, who seems to be wanting to put some more rounds into us, but I'm feeling relatively safe. Our tanks are pushing the northeastern corner of the map, and when they have pushed around a little bit further, I can expose myself more and hopefully advance forward. But I hope you got a nice idea at the start of this game the mobility of this tank as artillery smashing us. Again, you're able to get into a nice advantageous position early on and get some view range out. If you do boost your view range up, of course I don't, I invest it more into the gun handling and the DPM. However, if you find that you're not spotting enough and you're getting outspotted all of the time, then you definitely could run the advanced optics with the situational awareness on your commander to boost your view range up and get some nice spotting for your team. However, this is the equipment and commander setup that I've chosen to run, and it seems to be working so far pretty well, but I'm sure I'll tweak it in the future. So we've picked up 2.2k direct damage already in this game and 207 assistance. That sneaky T100 LT managed to come up behind us, and we managed to turn around with the pretty nice traverse speeds on the hull and on the turret now, with the command and equipment setup fully pimped out. You can see for a massive heavy tank you're able to maneuver quite well, and when you do get going to your top speed of 60 kilometers an hour, you do weave in and out of shells, and you definitely can bounce shots that way, and it's just nice to be able to get into position and turn corners without having to feel like you're turning some kind of massive boat in the middle of the ocean. So we're still doing the same thing on this ridgeline. We don't feel the need to move at the moment. We're not getting spotted just yet. Trying to find a shot to get into this object 705. Hopefully we can take him out with the subsequent shot. And you can see the reload for this 120mm cannon isn't too bad at all when you do have things like improved ventilation, advanced loader, and you're trying to boost it up with rapid loading as a commander skill. It gets down to a fairly reasonable level, and it's nice that the DPM has been buffed on this 120mm gun from the PC version and the Lorraine 50T, what they call it on the PC version, so that is always a bonus. And here you can see that at the end of the game you can get forward with the mobility and get the extra last bits of damage, and that's one of the really nice things about this tank. It's nothing too flashy, but it's enough to get the damage in at the end, and there are enough good points about it to make it a fairly decent tank. It's not going to be groundbreaking, it's not the next meta tank, but it's a fairly decent tank in my opinion. We picked up 3.9k damage in that one, and now we're into the second gameplay here on Halluf. I've skipped forward as we just were traversing into position. We're here before anyone else. That's due to the great mobility, and we've gone hold down on this ridgeline here, just trying to get shots into our opponents. We managed to bounce one off a Soviet heavy tank, I believe, crossing, and then we just tracked the E-75. Hopefully the artillery on our team will help us get some extra damage in this game. Just trying to stay safe. We've bounced 400 damage, showing you the turret armor. It can bounce shots, it's not always reliable, but if you keep moving on a ridgeline, then you'll find that you do bounce sort of 120mm caliber guns or lower. TDs firing gold are just going to butter straight through your turret pretty easily, unless they do hit directly into the mantlet with heat or something like that. But yeah, you've just got to play the odds, you've got to take the risks, go on the ridgeline, utilise that 10 degrees of gun depression with this 120mm caliber gun, and try and put your gun to work. And the shell velocity isn't too bad with this 120mm gun. It is a little bit slow with the 130mm caliber gun, as you'll see a little bit later on. But once you do have a few games in it, you do learn to play it and you get used to the play style of the tank. That Jagdpanzer E100's come round the corner. I was thinking about trying to pop over and getting a shot into him as he was turning around, but I did not want to take the risk at this stage of the battle. We've had a bit of a rough start here, bounced quite a few rounds, and it's a little bit of a mess with three tanks trying to use the same position. We managed to put our gun there in the way of that Type 5 heavy round, and we absorb a lot of that damage from the HE round, meaning we can snipe the cupola, and the standard penetration there working really nicely for us. The standard pen's really nice on this tank. We managed to go through that Type 5 heavy cupola at an angle, and then of course we followed up with a subsequent shot into the 15mm armoured turret of the FE 4005, which, if we were loading HE, would be a really nice damage number. He pokes over again, and we managed to get a nice shot into the box of a tank. And at this moment in time, we're just trying to get shots in where we can, but also when our enemies are trying to get shots into us, we're trying to make use of the reverse speed get down the hill and bait them over this ridgeline, and hopefully some of our tanks in the sort of D7, D8 location will be able to get shots in on them. We do get flanked by this Skoda T50, and I'm not having any of it. I was getting pushed here by the Super Conqueror, but he is just trying to get out of the way after all. We're going to go round auto lock at this distance, no problem, to go straight through the thin armour of that Czechoslovakian Tier 9 medium tank, and then we're going to turn our attention back towards this ridge line, and it looks like we might have a little bit of an opportunity once this FV 4005 has been taken out to advance around and flank the tanks that are in A2 and A3. I'm going to make use of this little gap in this little window in time to take out this medium tank at the back of the bunch. Just going to check my rear to see if that FV 4005 is still in the dip, which he is, and then we're going to come round from a different angle than our heavy tank and see if we can take this dangerous tank destroyer out, and then yeah, it looks like it's going to be jobs a good one. Unfortunately, our Super Conqueror does get taken out, but we managed to avenge his death there, and it's 10 versus 4, and it's looking like it might be a nice win in the Lorraine AMX M4. Got to be a little bit careful on this ridgeline here on El Halluf at tank destroyers that might be firing and able to spot us at this distance. But we're going to stop there to get a shot into the artillery, and as they now have an astronomical amount of hit points for artillery, we're going to see if we can get another one in there. Unfortunately, we just hit the destructible building, so we're going to use the great mobility downhill, getting up to 66 kilometers an hour. Fantastic mobility, and you saw there the accuracy at long range on that artillery. We managed to get a nice shell in there. And yeah, it's not too bad at all. We haven't had to fire any of the APCR rounds on this tank in this game. Just showing you the standard penetration is pretty tasty. And we're getting a nice little reward here. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to include this. It's nothing spectacular this game, but you can see that we just held our position, held our own on that ridgeline. You get shots out where you can. And the mobility at the end of the game has allowed us to get damage and assistance damage on this AFK Object 268 version 5, and that's boosted our damage up very nicely. We finished MVP in that game with 3.4k direct damage and 1.4k assistance with 1738 base experience points, and a nice profit with a premium account of 70,000 silver. So now we're into the third and final game with the 120mm caliber gun. We are here on Siegfried line, and we are about 1 minute into the game. We've just advanced into this position, and as you can see again, we are one of the ones that have got forward the quickest due to the great mobility of this tank. There is a Charfuchier 4 who is behind the little wall in front of us, so we're going to pop up here, see what we can spot, and we spotted that Object 277. A nice quick snapshot at this distance is no problem for this gun, and again the nice penetration, meaning we don't have to load the gold for higher tier heavy tanks, which is always a bonus. And we're just going to keep this position sort of locked down for the moment. We do have medium tank support to our left, and when we feel like we can, we're going to advance down this 5 line up to the north of the map and hopefully flank those heavies and that tank destroyer that are situated in the town area. I'm just a bit wary of artillery and maybe a tank destroyer or medium tank sat at the back there who's waiting for us to advance and then catch us out. But I got some support with me now, and we're going to go forward, and by being one of the furthest forward here, we're managing to get some assistance on this Charfuchier 4, and that's the joy of getting forward and being able to play a relatively aggressive kind of play style. You've got to think of this tank like a medium tank that has a little bit of turret armor. You can't really think of it as a real sort of super heavy brawling tank. It's a ridgeline warrior, great at supporting, and yeah, make use of that 10 degrees of gun depression and this fairly nice gun. And yeah, you should be golden. You've got 2 gun choices, and that will allow you some flexibility to suit different people's playstyle. So we managed to take out there that Charfuchier 4 with the aid of our friendly tank, and now it's this Object 780 who's going to be a bit of a pain in this location. It looks like we're either going to have to try and whiz around when we get re-stealthed, or we're just going to have to take a shot. Unfortunately, the artillery does manage to peg us there, but we're going to reverse back against this wall, try and avoid getting fire from that enemy artillery. Bit of a pain. They were absolutely demolishing this tank during my session. That is one of the major downsides to this tank. You can hold a ridge line, but you definitely do take more splash damage than something like a Super Conqueror or a Concept 1B or an AE Phase 1, another tier 9 heavy tank, so definitely bear that in mind. It can be extremely frustrating, and in typical kind of French fashion, it sets on fire relatively often as well, so that might be something you want to consider when you're thinking about your commander and your equipment setup. But we're able to use the great 10 degrees of gun depression there to get a nice shot in on that E75, and now we can put some rounds into this Stritzfarn 103B. Going to go for the track. Unfortunately, we don't track him, but it's just going to keep sitting there, and we're just not going to say no. We're going to oblige and put round after round into this Stritzfarn. And you can see that when you do let this gun get going, the boosted DPM that we have from the Lorraine 50T, the PC's version, is very nice indeed. It means that we're able to rack up a substantial amount of damage very quickly. We managed to aim for the side of that Stritzfarn there so we don't bounce off the front at an auto ricochet angle, and now we can advance round and see if we can spot this artillery or flank some tanks that are in the city, and then boost our damage total up a little bit more, and yeah, have another very decent round. It's a very consistent tank if you play it like this. You sometimes are a little bit frustrated at the lack of armor, and there are certain situations in which you can't be the one to make the aggressive play, but when you are the one and you have an ability and a map to go forwards, the mobility really does suit it well. And we were going to do a nice little salute here and probably kill each other with that ram, but the STB1 on our team manages to take out the enemy artillery before we manage to ram that RT. But we picked up a nice 4.6k direct damage there, and 722 assistance with 2 kills. Again, a nice profit with or without a premium account, and a very nice game to finish off the games with the 120mm caliber gun. So now we're into the 4th game of today's video, and now we're using the big old boy, the 130mm caliber gun. We get a nice shot there, and you can see that it really does chunk your opponents down when you hit and pen, and when you get a high roll it feels really, really nice. That was a low roll and we still managed to do 470 damage, so I think this is definitely my preferable choice in terms of the two guns. The DPM is lacking ever so slightly, but what you make up for in alpha damage, and the higher caliber gun, it just feels like it damages more modules, sets people on fire. I've had a couple of ammo racks already with this gun, and DPM isn't everything like I was talking about in the statistics. Of course, there are some times when DPM's fantastic and you really have to have it in a one-on-one fight, but for the most part, I'd say 75% of battles, you're going to be finding yourself in positions like this, where you're getting a shot in, you have the ability to fall back, reload, get a different position, and it's been long enough that the DPM wouldn't have mattered, and the extra alpha damage means you are able to trade really, really well with other tanks. Tanks that have 90mm caliber guns or 120mm caliber guns, you can trade really, really well with. One for one, you're going to be coming out on top, and if you're in a ridgeline position, hold down with your 8 degrees of gun depression with this 130mm caliber gun, and you have that ability to bounce shells, you should be doing really, really well with this tank. So we're advancing around this central little island here, going to pop round, get a shell into this 257, and unfortunately it deviates into his tracks, but that means that we should be getting some tracking assistance. Unfortunately, it looks like he has repaired, so we're going to make sure we aim in fully and take out the object 257 there, again showing you that even though the penetration is slightly lower with the 130mm caliber gun on its standard rounds, it's more than enough to combat a Soviet tier 9 heavy from the front. And now we're going to come and face hug this E50M. I was hoping that by now he would have been taken out by our friendly tanks. Unfortunately, I'm probably blocking all of their shells, so a little bit of a misplay here for me. But fortunately, the Progetto 66 does help us out, and now we can advance around. Picked up 2.7k damage already, and we haven't had to do an awful lot, and you can see that having that extra alpha damage, it means that sometimes in those games where you have those little down periods to reload and relocate, when you are getting your shells in, you kind of make them work and you make it worth it, and you manage to get a nice damage tally without feeling like you've had to sit in a position and put round after round into your opponents. So our friend the Randy Duck there gets taken out by the stupidly OP Tyran. Shout out to Randy if you haven't seen his channel. I'm sure you have. It's fantastic, just like Petty's, and you can find it in the description of today's video. But we're going to advance forward with the nice mobility, and we can use our good hold traverse to swing around and now aim in at the weak point of the Foch 155, the French auto-loading tier 10 tank destroyer. And at this distance, and at any distance really, the accuracy feels really nice with this tank. Even with this 130mm caliber gun, it does feel really nice. And with the commander skills that we have on console that are really strong, every tank's pretty accurate compared to what they used to be, but tanks like this are really powerful now with pinpoint accuracy at mid to long ranges as well. And now we're just chasing down this final bit of damage, and in a slower heavy tank in the tech tree tier 9 French heavy, we wouldn't have got that, and we wouldn't have been able to get that final shout in there. But that's a nice 4.3k direct damage there, sniper badge, 4 kills, and a nice profit again in that first game there on Kaunas. And now we're going to head into the 5th replay of today's video, which is the second in the with the 130mm caliber gun, I should say. And we are about a minute and a half into this battle, making our way down towards the south. I really had to refrain from trying to sing the song about making your way downtown there. Let's get back on track, Rob. Okay, right, so we're in this position here in J7. It's a relatively good hold down position, although there are 2 artillery on the enemy team, and that's going to be a bit of an issue. And in this gameplay, it's going to be a really quick one. We are going to get taken out relatively quickly, but we're going to have a nice impact. Whether or not it affects the end result there of this game, it's going to be another story, but it just shows that with this big caliber gun, you can still pick up some nice damage very quickly, and the DPM is pretty good for a 130mm caliber gun. I'm just rocking backwards and forwards, one, to keep my turret weak spots as hard to hit as possible, and 2, I'm always trying to poke up and get vision on tanks that are advancing down the 9-0 line. The artillery on our team are shooting what we're spotting, which is absolutely fantastic, and that's good news because there's a 3000 hit point mouse coming at us, so we're going to need all the help that we can get. We're snapping shots in fairly reliably at this sort of close range here. The shell velocity with this 130mm caliber gun can be a bit difficult at mid to long ranges to get used to. You just have to give like 25% more lead than you would with a standard kind of round that you're going to be firing with a medium and heavy tank at tier 10. But you definitely get used to it, and the trade-off for that nice alpha damage is really good. Just going to take out that bat chat. That was probably reloading there, so he wasn't able to reload and take us out from the side, and trying to keep all of your enemies as frontally as possible, because when you turn your turret, you definitely do give a nice big flat weak spot to your opponents. And if you've got tank destroyers or tanks like that Type 5 heavy, they'll be able to go through with the HE with their high penetration rounds as well and absolutely wreck your tank. And now we're just trying to dig in this position behind this rock, keep the vision up on these heavies, and we're playing as the kind of aggressor in this situation. Our friendly tanks are trying to advance around the north. Unfortunately, they are kind of losing at this moment in time. We've lost quite a few tanks in succession. It's a close game, and we have now been flanked by an IS-7. Fortunately, we have a Type 5 Heavy, which has kindly died in a very advantageous position for us. Panic there a little bit by auto-aiming at the 430U. I definitely don't recommend doing that. We are firing premium APCR now, so we're a little bit unlucky just to do tracking damage, but we're going to make sure we take him out now. we do have to take a little bit of damage, and it's looking like it's going to be our last little bit of damage as the mouse is advancing, and there's nothing that we can do to protect ourselves there. We have a weak hull. When he's above us, he'll be able to fire down on us, and that's just highlighting one of the big weak points of this tank. But we still finish in a defeat, top of our team with a profit, 3.6k direct damage, 1000 assistance, 2 kills, and 880 damage blocked. So a fairly decent result there in the Lorraine AMX M4 with the 130mm caliber gun. So this brings us, as I choke there on my own saliva, very nice, that brings us to the 6th replay in today's video, and it starts off with a very chancy shot. Didn't think I'd hit that shot at that distance, and we also get a fire, meaning that our first shell deals 729 alpha damage, and that's the kind of beauty you can do with a 130mm caliber gun that has fantastic alpha damage like this tank does. You do set things on fire and damage modules and ammo rack people a little bit more often than you would with the 120mm and other tanks that have smaller caliber guns at tier 9, and then we follow that up with a subsequent shot into the Falcon T92, take that tank out of the game, and we are in the same position we were in the first game we played on Halluf in today's video with the 120mm caliber gun. Again, luck seems to be blessing us there. We guessed that T25AT was just reversing a little bit, and we guessed right, and we managed to get a shell taking him out at mid distances. You can see the shell velocity was pretty slow there, so you do have to take a nice guess when you are blind firing, and if you are given lead, like I say, give 25% roughly extra lead than you would with guns that have 1000 meters a second shell velocity. And now we're going to advance forward with our mobility. We've had a great start to this round, very lucky, but also, you know, if you don't take your shots, you won't get the damage. And we're going to pop up, get a shell into the side of this 705, deal over 600 damage, which is a nice high roll there. And then hopefully we're going to reload in time to be able to get a killing shot into this 705, which we do, taking us up to 3.1k direct damage, 440 blocked, and 3 kills. And now we're going to come on the inside here, see if we can get a damaging shot into the medium, but he drops down, and I'm just going to advance forward. I know there's an artillery back here, and we're going to stop, aim through the destructible cover, and penetrate that artillery. We leave him on a sliver of hit points, and we're going to carry on advancing forward. We've got a nice slug of hit points left intact, and I want to get as much out of this game as possible, and this is where the beauty of that 60 kilometers an hour top speed and nice engine power come into play. We stop there, we auto aim at this distance, lazy, but I felt like it would hit if we waited about a second, and unfortunately as we lurch forward to drive on, we block our friend's shot, so I'm very sorry about that. But again, coming for the ridgeline, we fire on the move. We definitely aim that one though into the side of the Dragon, and we get a fire again. And this game seems to be blessed, and maybe it's just because it's the 130mm gun, or maybe it was because my RNG had just turned good for the rest of this session. And now while we are reloading, we're going to go for the ram on this Waffenträger Panzer IV. If we rammed a second time, we would have got that kill, but the T54 helps us out and takes him out there. Another snapshot there. I mean, that is lazy. I don't recommend doing that. You really should aim your shots, but it just goes to show the gun handling on a 130mm caliber gun on this Lorraine AMX M4 was really, really nice. And it just feels very, very consistent, and it gives you games like they're going to be having now occasionally. It's consistently good, but it does have the capability to have really, really nice damage games like we're having in this one. We get a shot into that T55A, and then we're going to try and get another shot into him to finish him off, which we do, and it's just one remaining medium tank left in the form of this Barask. We're going to use our mobility to rush into a position and now we're going to stop and give as much time to let the bloom go down on the gun as possible, guess where that Bourrasque was going to be with the slow shell velocity, and we managed to get a nice shot there into the Bourrasque, taking him out and getting our top gun in that game with a nice profit of 100,000 silver. Again, there's no silver booster, it's just when you have good games you make that nice silver with a premium account. 1861 base experience points. Top gun, 6 kills, 6.9k direct damage and 440 blocked. So that was the best game I've had in my session so far, and I definitely prefer the 130mm caliber gun. Both are viable, it's a good tank, not game breaking, and it's definitely not going to be the new meta. It's just whether this kind of tank suits your playstyle, but be warned, the armour is trash on the whole. But you can do things like that to a poor T100 LT, who we take out of the game. So thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.